Jeff Smith and his leadership for bringing me out here, and to the whole leadership team here down in the state of North Carolina. I couldn't be more pleased to be here and spend the afternoon with you all. There's likely no other place I'd rather be actually than right down here in North Carolina talking to you all about such an important content as suicide prevention and one of the Department of Veteran Affairs top priorities, rightfully said by my colleagues. So I'm happy to be here. I do want to let folks know I have a few others here in the room with me. So I'm a social worker by trade, and I've spent my career working for the various branches of the military, both at the installation level and at the headquarters level, at the regional level. Most recently down in the Marine Corps for 5 years at Quantico, but then also at the Pentagon and at the Department of Defense. So I'm new to the VA space, and so I don't think they probably wouldn't have put me on the road by myself here. So I do have Greg Hughes with me here in the front row, and he's a longstanding VA employee, and I just highlight him because he's also from the state of North Carolina and can help me if I take any tough questions. And I also brought Emily Madeline with me as well, and she's our outreach and communication specialist. And I do want to also identify Brad Lanto, who's here from our DoD team, leads up the behavioral health branch over at Cherry Point. So I'm really pleased to have these folks with us today. So just in the way of jumping right into the content, what I thought I'd do is go ahead and share some information rather quick so that I can get through some content, bring you up to speed with where we're at, both what I know in the Department of Defense, what I know across the Department of Veteran Affairs, and then we can spend some time perhaps dialoguing about some of these tough issues. That being said, okay, let me go right here. All is well as long as all is well with the technology. Just as we're getting started here, I guess I would just start with some level setting in terms of the scope of the problem. So when we think about suicide prevention, despite what the media might lead you to believe in the way of understanding veteran suicide, we hear a lot about 20 a day. And equally so, you hear about this with the active duty components as well. You should know that suicide is absolutely a national problem. This is not specific to the veteran space and or the active duty space. And you see here on the slide how it's the 10th leading cause of death in the nation. And when I am in circles in the DC area, I hear people talk about this in the context of all sorts of other health problems, whether you're talking about cancer or other types of illnesses that bring tragedy to families. The 10th leading cause of death. And you see 45,000 civilians dying, and you can see the price. I want to tell you the day 169 civilians per day die by suicide. So when you hear the 20-a-day veterans, no, there's 169 people per day dying by suicide. Am I going to struggle with the slides the whole brief or what? Okay, very well. Thank you so much. So you should know also a little bit about some of the risk factors associated with what we know about the data in terms of who's at risk for suicide. Please don't go too far, Moses. Those that are over the age of 55. So hopefully folks know that statistic. So you hear this talked about in the beltway sort of as the white male over the age of 55 phenomenon. So I would just offer to you to think more about that and what goes on with men over the age of 55. And we can circle back and talk more about that. Also, what we know within our veteran population is that females are more at risk. Veteran females are more at risk than their civilian counterparts. As a matter of fact, 2.5 times more at risk. So I would, again, ask you to give that some more thought as you unpack some of these issues and what we know about female veterans. And I couldn't be more pleased to hear you're having a women's summit right down here in North Carolina, because it tells me that you have identified this as a unique and perhaps vulnerable population group that you want to focus in more on. So it sounds to me like you're already doing quite a bit of good things here. I also share with you, I know you don't want to stand up here with me the whole brief, Moses. You're going to have to show me how to do this. All right, you took it off completely. Okay, we might be in business here. I want you to know about periods of transition before we get too far. Only because we're just now studying this a little bit more. We've always thought of periods of transition being an at-risk time, moving in between jobs and transitioning from one base to another base and this sort of thing. But most recently, we've been studying the data around transition, and what we're finding is that the first 12 months after leaving active duty is a particularly high time for suicide risk. And I myself was quite shocked when I first took this data brief from the DoD team, where I saw a slide that showed that service members are ending their life by suicide sometimes 3 days after leaving active duty. on day 7, on day 21, all the way up through day 90, the rates continue to rise, and through the first year. And so part of a broad public health approach in what we're doing in suicide prevention is a deeper dive into our data. And when you dig deep into the data and you start to understand when suicide's occurring and you identify this first 12 months as an at-risk time, it provides service providers like all of you an opportunity to think through how to design your interventions. So putting a hat on that asks us, what are we doing in that first 12 months? And do we have clean processes for people as they're leaving DOD and as they're going into the VA space or as they're going into community partners around the state of North Carolina? Is that lash up threaded well, so to speak? And so that's definitely something for you all to think through as we're talking about this. It's working on here, but not on the slide. That's the trick. Okay, there we go. When we're talking about suicide, there's a myth out there that says that talking about it will cause someone to think about it. Know that that's a myth, that suicide is absolutely preventable. And asking the question does not put people at risk. And so when we are training, whether it's young troop training with our youngest E1 to E4s or all the way up through our veteran community, we are training them to ask the question. Are you thinking of ending your life? Or have things gotten so terrible that you've thought of ending your life? Just directly ask the question because it absolutely is preventable. At the same time, we know there are complex factors at play. And so over the course of my career, whether I was working for senior leaders in the Marine Corps or right at the DOD, very senior leaders, I often get this question, what are the top 3 reasons somebody ends their life by suicide? And they'll want like a rack and stack sort of a list. What's the top reason? What's the second reason? And I'm sure all of you that work in this space recognize there's never 3 reasons. And when people end their life by suicide, it's often upwards of 20 to 25 complex factors that are interplaying all at once. And the absence of protective or buffers against the risks that we're seeing. And I'll share with you some more about some of the risks. Has everybody in the room heard this data point about the VA, whereby we know that 20 veterans die by suicide and 6 of them have been seen by our VA hospital in the months leading up to their death and 14 have not? Has everybody heard that? Okay, good, because that's getting out near and far and I want to make sure it's in your circles as well. And part of why this is so important is because we have a veteran population of 22 million. And when we're trying to prevent suicide, we're not trying to prevent it just within the 4 walls of our VA hospital system. And if we were, we would be doing good work to get after the 6 that we know about. But 14 that never touch our roles or don't touch our roles in the days and months leading up to the death, that is a complex group that we have got to really put our arms around and study out and identify how to get those extenders out there so that we can save those lives. And what we say at the VA is that we can't do it alone. I mean, this is like, you'll hear the phrase, suicide is everyone's responsibility. Well, what that means is when you're in the military, it's a peer-to-peer, Marine to Marine, it's a small unit leader, but it's also the janitor in the civilian sector, it's the librarian, it's the leaders in this room. It's not only us that do social science-based work, but it's also people that work in the 24-hour fitness, and just it's a truly an all-hands, all-community sort of approach. You can see some of the risks and protective factors here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but just know that it is complex. A lot of interacting factors. I do want to talk briefly about mental health, because this is a data point that's sort of gone back and forth depending on what line of literature you zone in on. People have this tendency to think that when someone dies by suicide that they're mentally ill. And sometimes they are struggling with a mental illness. And sometimes it's mental illness and substance abuse coexisting, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's relationship problems, financial problems, employment problems. It's not always going to fall squarely in the mental health space. So I don't want your takeaway to be like if we just surged up mental health, we could solve it. And I have a very good colleague, if you want to follow any of his work, Richard McEwen at SAMHSA. And I always steal his line because he says, suicide, if somebody dies by suicide, it's never the fault of one single clinician. And when we save a life, it's never the magic wand of a single sort of wizard or doc that's up there. It's usually because a system is working well. So I just offer you food for thought about our own system here in North Carolina and whether or not our system is working well. And just a good self-assessment around that. And to the extent that it's the individual systems are working well, then I would just ask you, how is your system working together? And is that well? And if it's not, just know that that's not necessarily a bad thing. It offers you an opportunity or a place to start when you're trying to make system improvements. And what we know in the field is that we're always in a state of improvement. Like, as long as we have 20 a day, we will be in a state of improvement. And so I would just offer that you should constantly be updating your system and thinking through how the parts and pieces of your system are working together. One of the biggest struggles that we're identifying about the transition space is that in times past we have perhaps had a singular focus on employment. And I know there are some retired service members in the room. Many of you are veterans, I can tell. But also I know that to be true. And we have this focus on employment as a primary driving factor. We even use the terms career readiness. We will make sure we meet our career readiness standards. So the focus is certainly on careers, make no mistake. But it also, or equally so, is this notion of social readiness. Social readiness to no longer be in the uniform. And what that means to no longer wear the uniform and wear the stripes or wear the rank or wear the, or no longer part of an everyday mission that perhaps you had when you were in the fight every day. And so the shedding of that, so much about suicide prevention is about social connectedness and belongingness, sense of purpose, mission, and hope. And so as you start to unpack this issue, and we might not have a clear sense of belongingness as you're leaving perhaps the military, your belongingness part of your person or your being might be unstable temporarily. And if you don't have a strong sense of purpose and mission, and we can't rally that around in a good way, it does increase risk. And so know that we're studying that. We're studying that right in DC right now, like the social piece of the problem. I think I shared with you quite a bit about the data, but I do want to unpack one piece of it a little bit more, and it's this one. How many of you in the room like data? I hope, right? This is how we drive our programs. Okay, good. I'm in good company because I want to explain this to you. When we look at our suicide data, there's sort of two ways to look at it. Two different ways to look at it. One is just raw numbers, and we do that all the time, and I don't always know that that's the best way to do it, but I'm just happy we're studying the data. Don't get me wrong. Raw numbers tells us 20 a day. It tells us 169 a day. And then we can unpack the 20, and we can look at it, by year. For example, this slide in 2014, we can look at it by year and by age. So when you look at the raw numbers, you can see, you'll see how many over the course of a year fall out. Equally so is important to look at in the context of rate. And when you're looking at rate, you're looking at the number per 100,000. And so what this does is it controls for the dynamics of the population. And so what we know is we have a lot more veterans that are over 55, right? There's just more of them. So if I just gave you the sheer numbers, the diagram on the left, you would lead yourself to believe, and rightfully so, we have a problem with 60 and over, right? Do we not? And if we look at the rate, we have a problem with 18 and over, right? I would just offer that we have to chase them both. Right? So the raw numbers are important and the rates are important. And here in the state of North Carolina, when you're designing your interventions, what are you offering for those that are 18? And perhaps we're only in for a short period of time, maybe left in a bad way, in an other than honorable way, that still need their lives saved and need to come to a good place, whether they're involved in any sort of troublesome situation. And what are you doing for the 55 and older, and are we doing it in a comprehensive way? So I'm glad I had the opportunity just to kind of walk through some of the data with you. I brought with me, and to the extent that I'm able, Greg, what's mine is yours. So these slides, if they've been cleared through the VA enterprise, take these slides and make them your own as you're trying to educate your own community partners about this, because you can start to look at the North Carolina data and how it compares with the national data. And you can look at that across age, you can look at the raw numbers, and then the rate, and you sort of see where you fare out. And as I was studying it, what I found was that your rate matches with the national rate. You're on par with the national veteran rate. But here in North Carolina, you're higher than the civilian rate. And so you can see how that, and I brought it in another way too, I want to show you. And this is a little bit of a I guess I'll just tee this up, a bit of a sensitive subject, but I'm just going to jump right into it because there's really no other way than to just jump right into it. And that is how veterans are dying by suicide. Certainly we should know the why. What are the factors? And I will just tell you, DOD and VA, they do fatality reviews and they unpack these suicides and study out what are the factors that go into the days and the months leading up to a person's ending their life. Equally important, and some researchers in the field would tell you, is how they ended their life. There are some folks that would fill this room with publications on the fact that we could prevent suicide by looking at the how. And here in the state of North Carolina, you start to see the percentages. My slide deck here doesn't match what's on the screen, so I'm having trouble reading the exact percentages from my spot here. But you can see the colors, and you see in North Carolina, most veterans are ending their life by suicide. The largest, the circle on the left with the dark blue, by firearms. And I have grown with this field over time, and when this data first got brought to me years back, even in my early Marine Corps days, I didn't all the way buy this phenomenon because I thought, they're trying to pull me into the Second Amendment space, or this is a political issue, or this is an issue I can do nothing about, and I didn't all the way buy it. I will tell you, fast forward a good 8 years, and this is something we can do something about. It's not a political issue, it's not a Second Amendment issue, this is not about restricting access to weapons or any of the like. It's truly just understanding that when someone's at risk, whether it's pills, pharmacy, poison, any material, vehicles, cars, we must do something to keep them safe. And we as service providers, but peers, veterans to veterans, we must all do something to keep people safe. I couldn't be more proud of the Air Force right now. I have to give them a shout out because they've been studying this issue too. They've been talking about how do we talk about firearms. Most of the airmen that are ending their life by suicide, over 70%, are using their own privately owned weapons, and sometimes they're buying the weapons in the days leading up to the death. So they're not long-standing firearm owners, so to speak, like many folks here in the state of North Carolina. But they are talking about it in the context of putting time and space between the person at risk and the identified means. So that means put time and space between me and the weapon. It doesn't mean restrict the weapon. Put some element of time and space. And they're calling it time-based prevention. And how that came to be was through focus groups with the youngest of airmen, coming to the table and trying to unpack these terms like lethal means restriction or lethal means safety and firearms safety, and all of these terms really know that what we're trying to do is get after the how. And if it's firearms, but if it's medication, let's get some partnerships in place with the pharmaceutical industry. And I've recently read some literature on blister packs and other safety measures for returning medication that you no longer need. We shouldn't be letting that linger in our homes when we no longer need them if we may be at risk. So there's many means to study out the how piece too, and I just want you to be able to crawl all over your data in such a way that you could design interventions that get after the why and the how, right here in your own state. And the interventions, this moves us to this discussion on interventions. The field has grown so much in recent years around interventions because years back, maybe 10 plus years ago, we thought of suicide as a medical problem. And we needed to bring medical systems to bear. And that is still true. People are struggling with physical injuries and wounded warrior issues and mental health issues, absolutely, substance abuse issues. That is still the case. But as you study the data from a public health approach, which is, do folks know what that term means, public health? Sometimes it can be kind of an academic term, but what it means is a comprehensive approach. Or a colleague of mine describes it as bundled. It's a bundled approach. It means bring bundled strategies, and I'll show you. I have a slide on what those bundled strategies are. It means don't just chase it through one strategy though, because you'll miss it. So here, when we say we take a public health problem, it just means we know our data, we study it well, we know who's at risk, we design interventions according to what our data tells us, we test them and we evaluate them, and we keep trying and try again, and as we learn what works. And these are some of the things that work. When you really try to unpack what would be a good bundled approach, a good group of strategies right here in your state.
You would have a good call center, which you do, the Veteran Crisis Line, the National Lifeline. Have some call center efforts. You would engage with your media in a positive way about how our veterans are actually heroes. And we don't want our media portraying our veterans as weak or as at risk, because in fact they're not. A large majority of veterans are doing well. So you need to work with your media and educate them, and you would have screening protocols that extend beyond just mental health. You know, they shouldn't just be screening for suicide risk in hospitals. There are, again, this is the Marine Corps, but I see this happening in the veteran space as well. That chaplains can train for suicide. Your whole faith-based community outside your system could be geared up. Chaplains, those who hand out towels at the gym, they could be trained on how to screen. There are hosts. Screening can occur anywhere with any population. It doesn't have to always be a medical term. I know that I heard this morning about some good work happening here in North Carolina where you're training your first responders and your fire and police. That's gatekeeper training. And you can kind of walk, you can look through the rest of them here. Public-private partnerships need to come to bear, formal MOAs and MOUs, and even informal relationships. Know that we can't do it alone, so we must bring any and all industry to the table when we're trying to get after this issue, because it's so complex. And you can see, like, if I just asked you, I did this little exercise myself, kind of thinking through our own interventions at the VACO level, and I thought, well, we have a good call center now, do we not? 2,000 veterans call the call center per day, and they make about 70 saves a day. They have this operational definition of save, and it is a save. I mean, Greg's a subject matter expert on the crisis work, and he would tell you, I mean, they're out there literally pulling people off of high-risk situations. So we have good call center work. I would put that in the green for those Marine colleagues. It's in the green, right? We're testing all sorts of interventions here. We've got evidence-based practices in all of our mental health facilities, and that's ongoing work. And we're studying our data. We have some work to do, but we're studying the data. We're learning more. We know this whole 14 and 6 phenomenon we didn't know before. And you see kind of my middle rows. I've got some good work going on, but I have some room. And as you look at my bottom row, this is my own little early self-assessment that I share with you. Like, I probably have more work to do in the gatekeeper community. I don't know that we have this great training now called SAVE. Everybody knows about SAVE? And if not, we can send you the link and get you that. SAVE. It's free and it's out there, and we're pushing it out through a partner, PsychArmor. But I don't know that every gatekeeper needs the same training. So for example, what nurses need to know might be different than what lawyers need to know when they're interacting with people going through divorce. I should have mentioned when I spoke about the risks, interpersonal relationships, struggles with relationships are a high risk. When you read these service members and veterans reports after the end of their life, you see deterioration of relationships. Not that alone. So I probably have some work to do in some of these in the bottom. Like I would suspect that this here could be called a coalition, the governor's working group, coalition of sorts. So I would just ask you about your actionable outcomes that are coming from your coalition. And do you have other coalition work going on? And I've got work to do in some of the bottom, but just an ongoing self-assessment of your own programming will help you think through how to do a public health approach. And I know a good number of you in the room raised your hand when I said who's a data person? Who's a theory person? Okay, a few of you. Okay, all right. Theory, I tell you a little bit here about theory. This is the way ahead in terms of the way that we're thinking about our programming across the VA. If we all in the room agree that 20 a day and we don't touch all 20, we recognize that we have a need to push suicide prevention programming across 3 broad areas. And this comes from the National Academy of Medicine, formerly known as the Institute of Medicine. Fancy capability that writes reports for Congress, but very easy theory. And what it says is that you should do suicide prevention programming for everyone. And I would just tell you that's for all 22 million. And so again, I ask you here in the state of North Carolina, what are we doing for suicide prevention for everyone in the state? If we reduce the veteran suicide burden in the state of North Carolina or in the country at large, we would reduce the national burden because we own so much of the national burden. So we could really make a difference on the bigger picture, but you must be doing something for everyone. Then you must be doing something for those select populations of which you have identified are at risk. So who here in North Carolina is at risk? Well, we could agree the 55 and older. We can agree females. We could agree people in the 12-month window. We could probably agree people out in rural North Carolina. Do I have heads for rural North Carolina area issues? Okay. And you probably could tell me more. Those that own firearms. Those that are struggling on our treatment roles and our substance abuse arena. Drill down and then do more for them, but know there's fewer of them, right? Because so many people are not at risk. And do it at the group level. So do something like you are for all females. We identified females are at risk, and now we're going to zone in on them as a group level. And then do something for the individuals. Offer them good, solid treatment. Offer them good, solid crisis line work. When you identify them at the individual level, do something for them. So I would just offer you, if you were thinking of sort of a quick way to understand this, all, some, few. And do you have a full bucket of options going across all of those three areas? And if not, where are your weak areas and where do you need to surge up? And when I first took over this programming on the DoD side, we had a lot going on in few. We were doing a lot of things, and it was heavily focused on that category. So I said, okay, guys, in the Marine Corps, we call that yellow. The selective would have been those in the yellow. They have some risk. They're at the group level. What are we doing there? So I had to start, surging up that bucket. And we had universal covered down because, troop training, lots of things, they just mandate them, in. So I just offer you to kind of study out your own thinking and apply this theory base just because it's such a simple one. I shared already how so many don't use healthcare. Keep doing your good work in your healthcare system, but know that system alone, that's where everyone else comes in. I am so fortunate. I'm so fortunate to be switching over to the VA side, even though I'm transitioning, so I'm under stress here. I'm transitioning Monday officially over to the VA. I've been in a detailed capacity. But in part of this role, I was able to sit on the National Action Alliance. If you don't know that term and you're interested, put it into Google. It's a group that designs the nation's strategy for suicide prevention. It brings in NFL, it brings in Johnson & Johnson, Kaiser, private industry, and public partners to design this book, which you'll see come up, and it needs an update, 2012. But this describes the nation's approach for suicide prevention, and I just offer that my team on the VA side, we are close to pushing out a sister document to this that's titled Veteran Strategy for Suicide Prevention. And it will describe much of which I'm telling you today under the good leadership of Jeff. I'm able to come down here and you're getting an early preview. But a sister document will come out just like this. And I want you to have a takeaway around the fact that there's been some success. What we haven't seen, remember that slide I showed you with all those boxes, my own little self-assessment? We haven't seen one state do all of that comprehensively over a period of 2 or 3 years to evaluate it for success. What we see is a bit of a reactive approach. So we'll see things like the crisis line not working well, so we fix it, and we surge up crisis support. Or we'll see we have vacancies in mental health, so we run that one down real well. But if we were doing all of those methods over a period of time, 1 to 3 years, and we evaluated it, we could start to look at some of the success across this bundled approach. So no one state has done this, but there's been some pockets of excellence that are worthy of studying out a little bit further, and I want you to have some of the access to some of the resources on that. And I highlight 3 states, California, New York, and Tennessee, and you can look at those, and I'll just share with you about Tennessee. Centerstone, because this is a hospital-based model, Centerstone, they have rolled out a capability called Zero Suicide, which is a term of an evidence-based model that teaches hospitals how to do comprehensive approaches for suicide. And I want to say in the second year of their rollout, they saw a reduction in their help-seeking population of suicide by 70%. Centerstone, put it into Google, Zero Suicide, and you'll pull up some of their evidence-based practices. I shared with Jeff that I would bring you some of the things going on in other states. And so that's the state of the suicide program. I have one other piece I want to share with you, which is latest and greatest coming out of the White House with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Specific to the 12 months, the President signed an executive order which says we will support veterans more during this first 12 months. As a matter of fact, we'll offer them free health care without regard to benefits. Sometimes when you leave DOD, it takes time to figure out your veteran status. I'm probably not using all the right veteran VA words yet, but I will get there, ma'am. I'm still figuring this out, but there are so many categories and qualifications and things like this, and we don't want that to be a barrier to care. At the end of the day, if you were trying to get after suicide and reduce your numbers, you would eliminate barriers to care, which I heard as one of your priorities, and you would improve access. Those two things would be quite helpful, and that's what this executive order aims to do. But none of it is easy. We're pulling together VA, DOD, and Department of Homeland Security for something called a joint action plan, which is a plan that details out how to give these service members and veterans access to care during the first 12 months. And it's giving me a little bit of trouble, but I'll just go ahead and share with you what I know about it. Not only opening up mental health care for them, but improving the transition space, designing something called an easy button. Are you within the first 12 months? Press here. Here's what's available to you so that you can get into the system in a streamlined sort of way. Identifying the importance of social connections and VSOs, and it just pulls the thread on all of this and puts it into this executive order and puts the VA on the dot for responsibilities to report back to the White House on how we're doing on these outcomes. First report is due back as early as July of this summer on some of those outcomes tied to this executive order. So I just wanted you to know that that's going on and that we're trying to study these issues and bring policy and legislative solutions to bear for the problem as well. So the arrow is not working, but I think that pretty well sums up the executive order part of it. I do want to share with you a couple of PSAs, just because I shared what's mine is yours, so you can use some of these, and I want to show you how you can find some creative ways to talk about this material.
I didn't want to talk. She just sat with me. That was all I really needed.
Coming, Mark?
We got back, and of course we went to different cities. One day he called me out of the blue, and it's comforting to know that I always can count on him to have my back.
We hadn't talked for a while, and then she texted me, and we went for a walk.
She called me from time to time. I really didn't think I needed any help.
I was away from my family during the holidays, and a friend invited me to their house for dinner. It really meant a lot.
He knew I was having a rough week, so he asked me to go fishing with him.
My friend knew that I didn't want to go out, so she brought me dinner instead.
It took me from being really depressed to feeling like somebody cared. It gave me some hope. Just that one text.
Be there. Your call, your presence, your words, your support. Be there and help save a life.
It open to the group. What questions might folks have for me about the suicide content? Either anything going on either on the DOD or the VA that I can be helpful about? We can dialogue a little bit about this.
My note here. Doug Taggart with Troops of Teachers.
Okay.
Basically help people get out of the military become school teachers. And one of the things that made me kind of laugh was the social readiness piece.
Yes.
When I'm talking to folks about becoming a school teacher and working with kids versus the soldiers that they normally work with, it's that's certainly a relevant piece of it.
Yes.
Where would you direct me on that? I mean, is that still too early to be looking? You said that there was some work being developed, but is there anything that you could direct me towards around that might be helpful in the work that I do?
I think we could probably send down some of our early lit review on this. Some of the, we've studied unit cohesion and we've studied the social connectedness while they're still in. And we've studied what it means to be a veteran and that identity. What we haven't studied is the space in between, when it's less stable, and we've been calling it the gray space between. When you're still involved in one and perhaps not all the way involved in the other. And so we've done some early literature review on this, and we can share what we know, and that way you can sort of learn with us on this.
And just a second part of that is the screening. You talked about the screening.
Yes.
Anyone can screen,
Yes.
I started thinking about the work I do again, and it doesn't come up often, of course, in the conversations around that transition to a job, but every once in a while, there are enough red flags in the conversations where I realize I need to do some referral to other folks as well. And I probably need some more guidance around that,
Sure.
so if you could direct me to the right person on that piece and anyone can screen that's not normally involved in behavioral health, that would be
Yes,
helpful.
it's a different phenomenon, and it's many times when I give that pitch, I hear the same question. And I would offer to you, and I see Brad is at your table as well, the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. It is a screening tool that offers non-medical folks a quick, easy way to understand screening. Oh, you have a copy of it right here, the one and only. Okay, can you show that to him? Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, this is an assessment tool that's designed for the lay public. You don't have to be a mental health professional to go ahead and assess for suicide. It's out there on the web. If you just Google Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale, you can go ahead and get a copy of it. And if you want to see me afterwards, I'm Gary Kuhn. I'm the Suicide Prevention Coordinator for the Durham VA Medical Center, and I can tell you more about it if you like. Thank you.
And this is when you're doing good work, when the crowd answers them for you exactly as you would have. He's good. There are a number of other screening tools available as well, but know that that's a good place to start, and then it's available for free and immediately. I think you had a question as well, sir.
I did, Dr. Franklin. Can we go back to the slide that showed the rates for North Carolina? I think a lot of us in this room want to believe that we've been working at this space for long enough that we might have made an impact that would put this state at least relatively better off than other states that are peer southeastern states. So could we look at that set of numbers again?
So I have two in the slide deck. The first is just where does North Carolina sit in the context of the nation, both rate and raw numbers? And then also I have it by means, suffocation, poisoning, other. You can see like the second highest category there.
Go back to that other slide that had it by rate and raw. So looking at North Carolina veteran suicide rate at 37.0. Southern region veteran suicide rate is 37.9, and national veteran suicide rate at 38.4. So in fact, parsing these numbers with a fine tooth, North Carolina actually sits better than the southern region at large and sits better than the national suicide rate by small percentages, but by percentages. Is that safe to say?
Yes, it's likely not statistically different. We would probably just say that comes out in the, I mean, they're all rather similar, but certainly it's going in the right direction, is it not? At 37 compared to the others. And the thing with suicide is the numbers, while we say it's a big burden, 20 a day, that's how you begin to get a reduction over time. You reduce it by one, you reduce it by another, you reduce it by another. I mean,
it looks like where we're high is that 18 to 34 segment that you were talking about, right? It's 75.9, so fundamentally, 76% against 71.3 and against 70.4.
Yep, you start to see that. Is that helpful for folks to zone in then? It's a good place to start for your own interventions. 18 to 34-year-olds. In some cases, these are our 4-year Marines that have done far. In other cases, they've perhaps done, two tours. They've gotten out after 8 years. Yes, you can start to see the high-risk groups. You can see your males and your females, but take this data and use it as you're doing your own community discussions in your own groups. This is all available online too.
And the thing you also have to consider though is that was almost 4 years ago. So with all the emphasis we've had on suicide prevention in the last 2 years alone, I think our numbers are much better.
And we have a new set of data coming out within the next, I'm safe probably saying within the next 30 days. Greg, you think? It's close. And that would be 2015's data. And I think 16's right on the heels because I know they're doing that analysis now. And the sooner we get that data to you, the better, I think, so that you can check where you're at. How's the scope? Have we changed since 14? Do I need to realign resources? Do I need to request additional? And if so, where and how? How can I paint my story? Yeah. Yes, sir?
Gordon Jeans, NCGWG. Do you have any more granular numbers for those first-year veterans that are basically the high target?
Yes.
Like how many of them might be students?
Yes. I don't know how many might be students, but I do have a little bit more. I know when they're dying from when they left service. So I have a slide deck on that I can share out once it gets clear to the larger VA leadership, and you guys can present it perhaps and share it as a do out for your next working group meeting. You'll see the when and you'll see the how. I don't have whether they started school. That would be an interesting data drill though, matching that up against the state data set of GI Bill enrollees or the like, sort of using two different sets of data and then looking, are those folks, are they on our labor rolls? Are they on our employment rolls? Were they in our healthcare rolls? That would be a really good exercise. Yeah.
Chapter 31, you know.
Yes, type of discharge, by type of discharge. So we do have some data people in the room. Thank you. It's a good question.
I'm wondering if your data shows any correlation between suicides and homelessness. Loss of housing being correlated with that.
Yes. Yeah, this has been one of the new things I've been learning on the veterans side compared to, you can imagine, my active duty side where I don't struggle with the homelessness issue, right? So I'm still getting up to speed on homelessness and a lot on the opioids and more on the substance abuse writ large, more so than my other portfolio. And homelessness is absolutely a risk factor. And if you look online and put in VA state data sheets, and you'll see North Carolina's, and you'll see how you compare against every other state in the nation. If that's important, if there's a good like match too, do that, because you know North Carolina better than I and who to match on if that's appropriate. Or match on 3 and take the mean of 3 if you're unsure. Take 3 others. That's my sort of cheater's method when I'm trying to look at data. But look at that and you'll see the homelessness piece. You'll see the sort of the bidirectional correlation, and of those that end their life by suicide, how many have been homeless in the days and months, to the extent that homelessness is a known variable to us in the data collection.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just tell you, interpret it with some level of caution on both ends, depending on what your figure gives you, because we might not have known if they were homeless if it wasn't in the data set. Yes, sir. He's like Vanna here, no, Oprah. He's walking around with the mic. He's helpful.
That's like with East Carolina University, and there seems to be kind of like a push-pull in this information that we're talking about and everything else. If we look at it, when I was in, if you had a minor infraction, you had an NJP, non-judicial punishment, you got a page 12, they took some money from you. If it was a little bit more intense, they might have taken a strike, but they still worked with you in an all-volunteer force. These individuals are coming in, men and women are coming into the service and that stuff as a personal, this is something that's very personal and passionate to them. They come in, they do a minor infraction and they're thrown out. On the other side, you have ROTC units that now, if you've done recreational drugs within the last 5 years, you're able to sign a piece of paper and say, I won't do it again, and they can come in as an officer, a commissioned officer in the service, and full sleeves of tats, low grades, different things like this, and yet we're putting individuals out every day in large numbers, and what that does to their self-esteem is destroys it.
Yes, no, it's a really good comment, and I used to be a part of these conversations in the Pentagon with this exact same phenomenon, largely tied to the nation's push for meeting their end strength goals. And I would sit in meetings where they would talk about young people writ large, and of the total population of 18-year-olds, when you clear for issues like weight and obesity and other healthcare and asthma and eyesight issues and the like, and you service members in the room probably know this data better than I, it would wicker down to a very small amount of eligible Americans, eligible to potentially sign up for the military. And so their pool becomes so small that they're drawing from. And as the need grows and ebbs and flows, and they go up and they go down in the requirements, we start to see some of the yo-yo effects of that is what you're saying. And I absolutely know they're studying that out and they're trying. They're even looking at, should we be screening differently in the mental health world before we take them in? Are we doing the right things? I know there was a study on the DoD side that pulled the thread on waivers, for example, because you can get a waiver if you have a prior situation of some sort. And the question, the research question or the hypothesis was, do those that get waivers, are they more likely to end their life by suicide than those that don't? And the answer was no. So having a waiver, meaning you had a minor infraction when you were a young person or you had something that didn't meet the quals and we still took you in, it didn't place you in more of an at-risk category per se. What we worry about are those that come in and I know this is going a little bit beyond what you were talking about, but those that come in and have some prior stressors, if you will, and or adverse childhood experiences. I know many of you may have studied the ACE work. And then they are exposed to trauma on top of trauma, whether that's wartime trauma. I don't want to say the military is full of sexual assault, but just like the civilian sector, sexual assault trauma, car accident trauma, any host of traumatic events with a baseline of pre-existing vulnerabilities, if you will, over time, that is a population that we worry about, particularly if we don't know about them, because then we can't zone in on them and offer them buffers. So it speaks to how complex this issue is, and to the extent that the system can do more to correct those equilibriums, we should. I do believe that we should. We shouldn't be a part of the stressor. I mean, there's enough. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, hi. I wanted to go back, if I could, for a moment to a comment that Terry made regarding suicides and veteran homelessness.
Yes.
This is an area that I would really like to see the VA drill into deeper.
Okay.
The reason being that it's an underreported number.
Yes.
When you have someone who is homeless or has been in and out of homelessness, who is battling with drug addiction and alcoholism, and then throws himself in front of a train.
Yes.
That's not reported necessarily as a suicide. Or he's found, or she's found, OD'd in their bedroom at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's not necessarily a statistic of suicide, but in many instances it is. So it's a vastly unreported statistic. I'm driven by data, but I'm also a theory guy, which confuses not only myself but my wife.
No, I can appreciate you.
But it's really important. And this whole issue of homelessness, we have been battling this now for almost a decade, since President Obama put it on the front burner. We're getting closer, but we are so far away from finding the answers that really work long term.
No, I appreciate the comment. I had the opportunity to visit with some of the local folks here in the room and take back some issues for me in my new role. And I don't, we did discuss homelessness a little bit, but I see Emily writing that down, so I'll take that back to our team at the VACO office as well, so I can dig a little deeper, understand it a little better myself, particularly to the extent that I can help inform the data collection so that we can get it right. Studying the scope of it and getting closer to right with the data is important. But also you remind me of the fact that we talk about suicide and transition. In and out of homelessness is a transition, is it not? Or unstable housing, it's in a constant state of transition. And so it fits in that bucket, I think, but even more so.
Well, thank you very much. Also, as an observation, there are many of us in this room that have vast experience working with veterans and homelessness and suicide. Reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to.
I heard that this morning as well. There was a fellow in the room with me. I think sitting right at your same table. He's volunteered himself to help me here with my VA tutorial onboarding.
I've got a quick question. There was a question. I'm Steve Wilkins. I'm with Vision 6 Public Affairs, and there was a question that came into the shop recently. Actually, from Jay. About the gender-based differences.
Yes.
And we discovered that there isn't a lot of data on female. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I know about it. And another good important researcher to study for those of you that are collecting a Google list of sorts, Thomas Joyner. He writes a prominent researcher, I think from the University of Mississippi. Florida, sorry? Oh gosh, that would not go well if you were here. Prominent researcher in this space, Thomas Joyner, and he talks a lot about access to weapons and tolerance for pain and feeling like a burden on society as this like trifecta that results in increased likelihood for attempting, and I want to talk to you more about attempts, but access to a weapon. And so the theory is, and this is just in the theory state because I've not seen this tested with a data set and ferret out, but the theory is that female veterans use firearms. They use them at work, they know how to use them, they have them, they know how to get them, and they have more access as a veteran than perhaps myself. I've never been a veteran. I've done quite a bit of social work on basis, but I have never been a veteran. If there were a firearm in front of me today, it might make me a little nervous. Don't really know much about them. I'd be like, should that be here? You know, I want some help. But a female veteran might pick it up and look at it and be okay with it and be comfortable. And as you increase your comfortability and you increase your access and you have a high tolerance for pain, and you feel like a burden, that's his theory, interpersonal violence, interpersonal theory for suicide. So if you put that in, that's one theory. I don't know that that's always the case, but the veteran, that's the one unique thing about females and veterans. So I'd be curious to hear what you have to think about that as well. I know you've had no time to think about it really, but come back to me if you process more on that issue, the female phenomenon. You remind me I should have talked a little more about attempts. In the suicide space, there is research that says that when you make an attempt, you're at increased risk for attempting again. And know that if you've interacted with people that have made an attempt, over time when we see completions, we see attempts in their history. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Ideations and attempts, it's not always a linear line, but know that attempts are particularly a high-risk time. And another piece of the research I should have mentioned, just because this might be relevant to some of the long-term work you all are doing down here in North Carolina, is the role of social media. Another one for your list, Craig Bryant, Dr. Craig Bryant out at the University of Utah. He's done a study for the Department of Defense that's looked at social media. And the fact that service members are putting their risks online in the public domain. So they're writing on social media, open domain, they're writing their struggles. And so they might write that they're in trouble with the law, they might write that they had an Article 15, that their wife left them, that they missed their children. They put that out there, and then they're putting on their platforms also that they have negative thoughts about it, negative feelings about it. They're putting pictures of weapons and pictures of alcohol, and even saying goodbye and then ending their life. And all the risks are right there. So if we know that's going on, and people have friends and groups on social media, I just offer to you that Facebook is trying to do something about it. They're offering, what to do and solutions. Hopefully you've seen some of that in the news where Facebook's engaging in suicide prevention. But also more locally are sharing those results with your own groups. Do the teachers know? Do others know that to pay attention and don't get caught up in the fact that thinking that somebody might be attention seeking, or perhaps it's someone else's role to do something. If one of your own friends or somebody you know are listing something that falls in the risk bucket for suicide risk on social media, I offer that it starts with you, it starts with you, it starts with me, and we have to do something about it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sorry, last one I promise.
No, please, I'm glad to hear it.
Teachers again. Just curious, it might be too far off topic, but for military-connected kids, is there data around suicide rates for kids that might be military-connected versus the regular population?
Yeah. You're asking the same question that Congress is asking. While I was on the DoD side, that came down as a sort of as an official tasker. The theory is that civilian rates of suicide death among youth, and when you look at the youth data, pull it up on the Suicide Prevention Resource Center website, you'll see that it starts as early as age 10. But youth is on the rise. So the Garrett Smith grants are targeted toward youth. I think you may have some here in the state. Some of those dollars may have come down. And so the thinking is, if civilian youth are on the rise, equally so must be military youth. And also the curiosity or the request for info from the Hill was also that military spouses are all potentially at-risk category. And do we know the scope of that problem? So we've only just started collecting that data. We do not have a good data collection mechanism in place that we feel solid enough with the data yet. But it's underway, and it's due to the Hill. So good question.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm Mark Ticci. I'm the director of the Veterans Treatment Court. And we see a lot of veterans that come in. 88% of them have co-occurring disorders, mental health, substance use disorders. Yeah, 40% of them have suicide ideation when they come in. It's those that we work with. And I tell you, our court works with these veterans that really have a lot of issues that they bring back from their experiences on the battlefield. And that's where we start seeing them. And the first year after they, suddenly that support platform popped out from under them, which is transition time.
Yes.
That's where we're starting to see a lot of the veterans that are coming into our program. It's those that we work on that we can't, because of issues that are way beyond our capability.
Yep.
They eventually either commit suicide or they're in prison. And that's the reality that our program sees. And a lot of it, we have to communicate with our own staff to get through those issues.
Yes, yes.
So,
I'm hoping to learn more about the vet treatment courts and how I can be a better partner to that group in my new role. Learn more about the collaborative opportunities. I offer to you this term that I've heard quite a bit that it just reminds me of your work. This idea of falling from glory or falling from grace. And so when you are a good-to-go service member and you are the command's go-to person, or you're a good-to-go vet for that matter, like you are the veteran, and you know what the veteran looks like. There's probably some in this room, right? They are just your go-to guys for all things veteran issues, and they're on your shop and you want them on your team. And when they lose that status and perhaps they've fallen from glory for any host of reasons, but particularly reasons that put them in legal trouble, so much so that they're in court systems and stuff, know that you are dealing with the highest risk group. In part, falling from glory is hard to return from, and some can't. And so I just offer you to know that you're doing hard work, and I'm right there with you.
I just wanted to add to that.
Yes.
And we see that in court. And one of the first things, and a lot of people have been to our court here, one of the first things we do when the veteran first comes in is the judge will actually come off the bench and go to him and pin on a veteran's pin and tell him that we're right here with you as you go through this new journey.
Yes. Such a good point, because what the judge is doing is preserving dignity in the person. And while they may be in a bad place for all things that they've done wrong, this idea of sense of self and dignity and preserving that in any small matter, subtle way that we can, I think that is commendable. And to the extent that we can use that and generalize that in other means, I say let's do more of it. I mean, most importantly is we're trying to instill hope. Hope is at the heart of a lot of suicide work, and I used to have a great opportunity, and I get to do less of it now, to train new social workers, new folks coming into the field. And they are often nervous taking clients, right? They're very nervous and they're just learning the content. And I tell them, like, if you interact with someone at risk and you do nothing else but instill hope until you can get some supervision and get your bearing on what to do in the next session, then you have done good work. And similarly so with these people in the throes of complex court matters. Every interaction should be one that leaves them with a ray of hope, and I would hope that there's hope, right, at some point. Yeah, it's hard work though. 2 more questions. Okay.
Hey, John Freudenberg. I'm with the Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic at Keita Valley. To Doug's question about the rate of at least suicidal ideation, if you look to Blue Star Families, they do their family surveys. I don't know if somebody maybe is on the line and they can get more information to you about that. But alarmingly, it is shown, at least for people considering suicide, that the rate is like a few points higher for the family member and the children than it is for the actual service member. So that's something to just keep in mind for folks. From what I've seen, I don't know what the latest
I would
show.
have to study Blue Star's data. I don't know. I do know that military children are very resilient, equally so spouses. I know there's a lot of resources, but I also know it can be a complex time, and periods of parental absence over the lifespan or the development of a child can be rough.
Yeah, I was so glad to see that reinforced about the social readiness piece, because if you look at some of the data on the military kids side, one of the biggest things that pops out as a difference for them versus the civilian population is their connectedness. They feel like they can't find their niche. So I think that is a huge part of this. But with the Keita Valley Health System, we implement the Columbia Suicide Severity rating scale across the system, and it's also in the school system and a number of other different organizations around our community. And I would just want to see, just real briefly, is there any kind of data, we were talking about this yesterday, Jeff and I don't have an answer on it, but is there any kind of data that's showing that kind of approach in a large scale? I know there's evidence behind this, the severity scale, but Can you talk to like the efficacy of doing something like that, or any models maybe we can point to that are working so that communities can take that back and implement something that is evidence-based and we know is working?
Yeah, I can tell you what I know about it. The Tennessee example that I gave you out of Centerstone, they use the Columbia Severity Rating Scale, a medical version. I don't want to cross wires, but know that there's a medical and a non-medical, and that Centerstone and Zero Suicide method uses the Columbia, and they have all sorts of data on that. In part, I don't know that the data is parsed in the context of the Columbia alone. The evaluation data looks at broad interventions, of which one is the Columbia. So I did get 2 studies just this week, though, in my inbox, specific to the Columbia that I saw where they tried slicing it out more specifically, and I scrolled to the results really fast and saw, okay, this is something I want to read, and it looked in the positive direction, and I'm happy to share those with you. Also, while I was in the Marine Corps, my own example, down in the Marine Corps, we trained chaplains and attorneys on the Columbia across 17 bases and stations. And we rolled it out just like you would if you were a headquarter element for the Marine Corps. We had phased approach, phase 1, and we rolled out a number of other interventions that same year. There was a 22% reduction in suicides in the year that we rolled it out, and there was some qualitative data brought back by the attorneys, which gets after your vet treatment court issue as well, where attorneys felt more, we asked them, like pre and post, their comfortability level with engaging on issues related to suicide, because the attorney has a tendency to want to come in and like assess their legal issues and sort of send them on their way. Vice really being able to say, are you at risk? I know you're having a tough issue. You were the sergeant major last week, and now you're over here in the detail assignment, marginalized from your peers. This has got to be difficult, and giving them the tools to assess. We found that all to be positive, but the results didn't stay year over year. I think that the thing with the training is you can't do it one and done. New folks come in, new attorneys, new chaplains, and there has to be a sustainment plan with it where you're always pushing it in a way that remains a high level of fidelity to the model with a high level of rigor if you're going to really get this right. The one and done sort of methods, problematic over time. You might see a small spike in the good direction, but if that tells you that, that's your signal to do more of it. Vice, to pull the throttle off of it and turn your head to another content area that's also struggling. So I will also share with you, because you reminded me, when you're looking at the data for suicide and you're doing these bundled approaches that I shared, it's not uncommon for communities to see reductions across to other areas that will be important to you all here at the front table. When you're pushing these approaches and you're trying to reduce your suicide burden, you'll see reductions in domestic violence, child abuse, alcohol-related incidents. In part, it's the same group of risks. It's the same populations that are in our treatment court roles, that are struggling in our homeless roles, that are struggling in our mental health roles. And so when you can do this bundled approach and get after the broad issues, you would likely see the rate and pace of the reductions go at the same pace, the same track, if that makes sense. Something to think through for your own interventions. Moses is in charge of questions here. Has our time?
Yeah, it's
okay. Thank you all so much for the hard work that you do out here in North Carolina. I'll continue to track your progress.